This podcast discusses true crime, which may entail violence and other material intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised.
And it's Lexi.
And we are back for part 2 of the Snowtown Murders. We kind of left off, let me see here, where Suzanne joined Ray in the yard, basically, and we're moving on to where John and Mark get their rental property in Snowtown. So I think we should just dive right in because it's going to be a deep one.
You know, it's already a deep one. Let's just make it deeper. Maybe the deeper
Yeah.
we dig the hole, we can use the dirt as a ramp. Dig us out.
Alrighty, so let's see. One day, police knocked on John's door. They were making inquiries about discrepancies regarding Suzanne's check since one had been cashed at Murray's Bridge and not Adelaide, and the address it was cashed for was his and not hers. So John just told them that he was a friend of hers and was helping her out with her finances. They bought it, so he was just cashing her checks.
Okay.
They were like, okay, that checks out, whatever. John had still gone on calling people to accuse them of being gay and or pedophiles and actually started breaking into their houses and vandalizing them. Instead of just threatening them, he was like destroying their stuff now.
Oh, wow.
The police were not contacted as they had not helped any other time that these men called for help. John had gone back to Barry for more names and he gave him the name of Michael Gardner. John and his crew had abducted Michael in the middle of the night. Michael was an openly gay teenager, and they threw him into the car and headed towards Snowtown, where they electrocuted and tortured him to death. Afterwards, they put his body in a barrel of acid. So this is where they're starting to use the Snowtown Bank for their body disposal.
Where do you just get a barrel of acid?
So John excelled in chemistry in high school. He kind of carried that to his adult years where he made like some kind. It reminded me of like, have you ever seen Breaking Bad?
Actually, no. I'm so sorry. I know what it's about. I've never actually seen an episode.
Well, in the show, along with what John did, is he just mixed chemicals together to make this type of acid that doesn't dissolve the plastic, but it'll dissolve people.
Okay. I mean,
So
you'd be
yeah,
shocked at how many acids will do that.
yeah. So they also wanted to collect his benefit checks, but they needed his ID, which was kept at the house that he was renting, and the landlady had taken it when she thought that Michael had disappeared. She had actually called the police when he disappeared, but since he had a reputation of running away, no one listened to her. John needed someone to get it for him, so he hired Fred Brooks to do it, which was his friend Mark's sister-in-law's son. Fred called her saying that he was Michael's friend and that Michael was looking for his wallet, so could she send it to him? She refused, saying that if he wanted it, that he could meet up with her to get it, and they ended up not being able to get his checks. So this lady was kind of like catching on to what they were doing. She thought something bad happened to Michael, and she thought these people were involved, but she didn't have
Mhm.
any proof, and
Okay.
the police weren't listening to her. So after Michael, Barry did not think he could give John any more info as he could not stomach it. He was starting to get a little bit of a conscience for what he was doing
Mhm.
now that people were dying from what he was doing. The neighborhood had a man named Thomas Trevelyan. He was a mentally ill man who dressed in army clothes as his dream was to be a soldier, but due to his disabilities, he was unable to. He also
Okay.
carried an yeah. He also carried a knife and constantly worked out, so he was pretty strong. So he was a pretty strong man.
I feel like we all know that person. You know what I mean? Like we all know like knife gym guy.
Yeah, I went to
Like
high school with one of them.
everyone knows knife gym guy. Like it just always inexplicably has like a lock knife on him and he always just
Hmm.
got it at like the show, you know.
Yeah, always wanted to be a soldier, going in the
Right?
army.
Right? Yes, yes. Like always just like fantasize about being in the military. Like that's a genre of person that continues to be repeated over the years.
Yeah. So one day, Barry invited him over for a drink in the summer of 1977. They hit it off, and Thomas eventually just moved right on in. Barry had told Thomas about his experiences with John and his gang, and these rumors circulated until they reached John. So John and Robert went to visit Barry with a six pack to see what had been going on. They kind of like showed up like they were being friendly, like, hey,
Mhm.
like we've been hearing some stuff. What's been going on?
Okay. Like just being like, "Hey, we just want the tea."
Yeah,
Like
basically.
not being
And
accusatory. Okay.
yeah, and I'm sure Barry was still puckering the entire time because John showed up at his door.
Yeah.
Barry went on about how despicable they were and just ranted at them for what they've been doing. And after his rant, John just like nodded to Thomas, who then grabbed Barry by the neck and dragged him to the bathroom. So John
That's not good.
somehow had Thomas under his control as well.
Wow. Okay. So this man's
They,
not just like insane and violent. He's also at least to a degree effectively manipulative.
mhm, yeah. They put him in the tub and forced him to call his mom, who he never had a great relationship with. They made him read off a script saying that this would be their last conversation and that he was moving to Queensland.
Okay.
After After that, they tortured him to death and took his body to Snowtown to put into a barrel, and they also started taking his benefit checks as well.
Jesus, that's awful. I like at some point I feel like the bank or something has sorry, my dog gets very excited when she's being fed dinner. If you guys can hear that. So I feel like our dogs are just part of the podcast at this point. It's fine. Um I feel like how are they not catching on? Like I feel like these people are cashing like 10 different people's benefit checks.
Let's see. There's Barry's, Ray's, Suzanne's. I can't remember if there's a fourth person. It's been a couple weeks since I looked at the script. But there is at least three or four people that they're collecting all these checks from.
Yeah, like enough that it's a little suspicious.
Yeah, but I guess no one's like really checking to see as long as they're cashing the checks under their addresses, I guess, like under the correct person's address, it might not raise any flags. I don't know how
Mhm.
that system works, especially in the 70s. The police had a growing interest in Suzanne's checks and payments, and the payments were going to be halted unless she called into the offices herself. So he used Jody to call and pretend to be Suzanne. So he used her by sleeping with her so she would do whatever he wanted. So that's kind of like how he manipulated the women in his life.
Okay.
She called and resolved his issue, continuing the checks to him. Thomas had started to crack under the pressure of what he had done and had a breakdown.
Oh.
John and yeah, which I feel like any sane person would, whether like I don't know, you're under John's control or not. Like Barry started to have a
Yeah.
breakdown about it. Thomas is starting to have a breakdown about it.
Yeah, like eventually you're going to reach that breaking point.
Mhm. John and Robert went to confront him and expected to find him going crazy, and they expected to be able to just kind of push him over the edge to either commit suicide or be committed to a mental institution. They were expecting to find him like, I don't know, like going like berserk. And they were like, yeah, we're just going to push him like to the edge.
Okay.
Instead, they found him inside, catatonic and numb. Like nothing they said or did was bothering, like could affect him. He was just kind of shut down.
Okay.
John was able to convince him to go into the car, and together they all drove to Adelaide Hills. Mark tied a noose around a tree, and John ordered Thomas to step onto a box by the noose. At first, he refused and cried, and then John talked to him and calmed him down. Thomas then stepped onto the box, and they tied the noose around his neck. His body was found a month later and ruled as a suicide.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I don't know what you say to a person to convince them to be able to like hang themselves. I
Yeah.
don't know if he's like that manipulative, but that's crazy.
Yeah, that's awful.
To deal with everything that John was doing, Jamie had turned into a heroin addict. So Jamie is starting to crack as well, and he's using drugs to deal with like all the death that they have caused.
Mhm. Mhm.
This bothered John because John saw addicts as weak and subhuman, and he was becoming concerned as Jamie knew too much and was worried that he was cracking.
Okay.
John had come home one day to find a man named Gavin Porter, one of Jamie's friends who was also an addict, sitting on the couch. Jamie explained that he needed a place to stay. John was like hospitable and charming to Gavin, letting him stay, but was basically just gritting his teeth through it just to keep his relationship with Jamie.
Okay.
His atti- yeah, his attitude changed though when John sat on the couch and was stabbed with a used hypodermic needle, which I feel like that would throw anybody over the edge if
Yeah.
you're sit on your own couch and you get stabbed with a used needle. But I don't think I would go to the extreme that he did
Mm-hmm.
because we can all see where this is going. He went to the driveway where he found Gavin asleep in his passenger side of his car. John snuck in behind him with a tire iron and pinned him to the headrest and choked him to death. He drove his body to Snowtown and put him in a barrel. When John got back from Snowtown, it was late and Jamie was up waiting for him, knowing that something happened to Gavin. John dodged Jamie's questions and said they would just talk in the morning. Jamie left and stayed with a few friends for a couple of days, and when he came back, he saw that Gavin's car was gone along with his belongings. John preached to Jamie about drug usage and how it was just weakness. And this just got Jamie to break down and tell him about the past with his father and stepbrother Troy abusing him.
Okay.
His stepbrother Troy actually wanted to come and live with them to escape their father as well. And when he came to live with them, Jamie felt betrayed, and John told him, quote, "This is your chance. This is your chance to get him back," end quote.
Hmm.
On Troy's first night, he woke up to Jamie, John, Robert, and Mark hovering over him. Jamie had beaten him to death and dismembered him, and they also put him in a barrel.
Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah. I'm assuming he's around 20, um, because Jamie's around that age. They were both abused by the same man, and Troy also abused Jamie.
Okay.
I think also sexually abused him, and just kind of, I don't know, just used this as his chance to get back at him.
Yeah.
It's terrible. So, after so long, Elizabeth, Mark's wife, started asking questions about their finances, such as where did the money come from and where did it go, and why was John involved in their money? Mark had told John about the questioning, and John made it clear he wanted her dead. Mark did not agree, and they chose a different path to keep her quiet. They were going to go after Fred to keep Elizabeth quiet. So, Fred was seen as a loose end who told Elizabeth everything he had done for John, and Fred ended up dead and in a barrel in Snowtown. And unsurprisingly, Mark collected his disability checks and Jody stopped talking to John.
It's just nuts how they're just continuing. Like, I guess there's just less regulation on it in this time, but it's just crazy to me how the constantly cashing other people's disability checks or benefit checks or whatever, or it's just
Hmm.
not raising any red flags.
Yeah, I don't know how they're managing to get away with it. Unless like the system wasn't as like as tight as it is today, but no idea. I'm not quite sure how that system works. Gary O'Dwyer was a man who lived alone, had no family or friends. He was mentally disabled from a car accident he had in his 20s, and he also received government checks. Jamie had just started visiting him to gain information about him and his house until one night he and John came to his house while he was sleeping. So they only attacked and killed him for his checks and considered him an easy target. They electrocuted and tortured him to death and placed him in a barrel and took him to Snowtown. So this was their first victim that wasn't like in their eyes having a purpose to be murdered.
Oh, okay.
Like everybody else was like they saw as either gay or a pedophile or turning
Hmm.
against them. This guy
Like they,
just
they
had
had some kind
checks.
of motive. Yeah. And at
Yeah.
this point, they're just killing for money.
Yeah, they're just killing for money.
Hmm.
So Mark's wife Elizabeth continued questioning him and looking into their finances, and she managed to find everything to prove that fraud was going on and that John was involved. She suspected all the murders but had no proof of them. Her main goal was to put John in prison, and she wanted to convince Jody to testify against him, but she knew nothing other than pretending to be Suzanne, because she didn't know anything about the murders either. She just was kind of used at that one time to call and pretend to be Suzanne to get the checks. Mark again told John about the questioning, and again John debated on killing her. In November 1988, she hinted to Mark about knowing about Snowtown Bank building property and wanted to go visit it, even if she went alone. So this action kind of like signed her death warrant because they were like, well, she's about to figure out everything they've been doing.
Hmm. Okay.
One day, Mark and Jody were out, and Elizabeth was home alone when Robert and John came to the house. She was shocked to see them in broad daylight, and John rushed her and strangled her to death. They put her in a barrel and took her body to Snowtown. Mark came home knowing John killed her, and he was distraught. He knew John was going to kill him, but I guess it didn't like sink in until he realized that she was actually gone. Like he didn't really like he couldn't exactly fight back because he knew how John was.
Hmm.
John tried to cheer him up by saying he was a free man now, but nothing could console him. And he just started to kind of distance himself from John at this point. The next day, Elizabeth's brother Gary and Sinclair reported her missing as she never showed up to meet him. And this is when police started asking Mark and Jody about it.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, Mark gathered all the evidence that Elizabeth had collected about their fraud and burned it. In order to get Mark back to him, John went to find a victim so they could bond over the murder. Which, like, again, they're just
Bond
looking.
over the murder. That is a
Yeah,
sentence. Yeah.
yeah. He was just trying to find anything to get Mark back to like to his inner circle because he knew Mark was distancing himself. And he's like, well,
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
both like to murder, so we might as well just find an easy victim and continue on what we've been doing. Jamie had multiple step siblings from his father's side, and John had asked him to reach out to his brother David. So David was on a great track in making something of his life, and John pitted this against Jamie, angering Jamie and making him resent David. So, from what I understand from the book, David and Jamie were kind of like they weren't close, but they had like a decent relationship until John came along and started pitting them against each other.
Okay.
David was on the lookout for a secondhand computer, and Jamie said he could help him with that. David had a feeling that it was a stolen computer, so he had Jamie go with him to check it out so he wouldn't get mugged. Because he kind of knew Jamie's background and was like, well, if you're going to get me a computer, I'm going to assume it's stolen. But, like,
Okay.
yeah. They drove to the old bank building in Snowtown, and when they got there, they went inside, and David saw the computer and three other men. David went to try the computer and ended up grabbed by one of the men, and Jamie knocked him out. He woke up tied to a chair, and the mic from the computer was facing him. Jamie dropped a script into his lap, and he was forced to say into the mic that he was moving away, that he molested little boys, and that he was gay.
Ugh.
After, yeah. After this was done, they took his bank card because they knew he had a large bank account. They wanted his PIN, so David gave them the wrong number in the hopes that they would get caught trying to use a stolen card and he would be saved. John and Mark stayed with David as Robert and Jamie went to use a bank, and while they were gone, John started torturing David, and Mark helped him. When Jamie and Robert came back without the money, they were angry to see that David had died. They were kind of more upset that it screwed up either way. They weren't
Mhm.
mad that he died because they had the wrong PIN and the money. They were mad that John killed without them. They felt betrayed.
It's just getting so like it's getting so deep at this point.
Yeah. They like have this weird their whole relationship is just based on John controlling them and making
Hmm.
them do whatever he wants. And
He's
whenever
like
they
a
see
gang
that,
leader.
yeah. And
Yeah.
whenever they see that he's doing that without them, they feel like they're not part of his inner circle.
Hmm.
They were upset. I just said that. Mark and Jamie walked away and talked it out, and when they came back, they found John cooking a piece of David and serving it to Robert.
Oh.
Yeah. This, I think, is the only time they did cannibalism. Because, yeah. The rest of David was put into a barrel. All this time, Garion was still pushing police to try and find his sister. Police felt like the whole situation was wrong since Mark and Jody told similar stories, but there were significant differences, which kept getting more kept getting worse the more they were asked to tell their stories.
Okay.
So so things are starting to fall apart.
Yeah.
Garion pushed police to look into their finances since Mark didn't work, yet they had a nice house and rental properties, which like that's kind of like a something for him to like goodly for him to go on. He's like Mark has never worked a day in his life, and yet they have all these rental properties. They
Mhm.
have a decent house. Like it doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Police pursued the financial records, and the more they looked, the more they found that missing people's money was going into Mark's account. They
Okay.
kept learning that people were either missing or dead.
Okay. So now it's finally the red flags are here. Like, oh, okay, they've
Yeah,
been cashing all these checks. Now we finally know what's going on.
yeah, and
It
they're
only took
finding out like
4 or 5.
five, yeah, about 5 or 6 people.
Yeah.
With all their looking, they found the Snowtown Bank building, and they
Mhm.
decided to go and check it out. And that is where they found the computer with an unedited recording of David's recording, where they also heard him being tortured into saying these things. They looked around and found the vault that was full of barrels. One officer found a screwdriver and propped open a barrel to a horrendous smell. They called in specialists and opened other barrels, finding all the bodies of the people John and his gang had killed. Witness statements pointed police to John, and they ended up getting a warrant to check out his old property backyard where they found the bodies of Ray and Suzanne. They arrested John, Mark, Robert, and Jamie. John was convinced they couldn't get him on any murders as he was sure that there was no body, there was no murder. But ironically, he thought that all the bodies were being dissolved in the acid over the years.
Mhm.
However, his chemistry was wrong, and instead of dissolving the bodies, he ended up kind of like pickling them and perfectly preserving them to the point that the coroner could tell their time of death and see every mark of torture on their bodies.
What?
Like body yeah, so bodies that have been in there for years, perfectly preserved, that the coroner could tell the exact time of death. Which plot twist, which good plot twist because the
I mean, yeah, like thank
you could tell
goodness,
who's
but
who. Yeah.
wow. I was not expecting that.
Yeah.
Oh. Mixed feelings about that. Like on the one hand, wow, thank goodness. On the other hand,
Horrifying.
yep.
Yeah. Which, like, and even if, I don't know, John thought even if they were dissolving, he would get off scot free because, like, technically it's not a body, it's a melted body. But, like, you could still,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's still ways to know that it's still a body.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Police needed someone to testify for the murders, so they tried Jody, but again, she only knew of the fraud. John's wife, Elizabeth, had cancer while this was going on and ended up dying. And this affected Jamie because now he thought that he had no one in his life other than John, and it was all John's fault that he was isolated from anyone else in his life. So he started to have remorse for what he had done. Jamie had then cut a deal with the prosecution, and he would give full testimony, plead guilty, and serve his time, and in return, no photos or description would be in any media. Which even to this day, like the book I read, like there's no description of him. No
Wow.
hair color, facial recognition, nothing like that. And I can't find anything online. So Jimmy had received 4 life sentences. John felt proud for what he had done, saying he killed pedophiles and admitted to it. He was convicted of 10 murders in September of 2003, and he was sentenced to 11 life terms with no parole. Robert was sentenced 10 life sentences, and Mark was served 25 years, all with no parole. And that is the story of the Snowtown murders.
That is that is a lot. That did not at all end how I was expecting it to. I like I kept thinking I'm like, "Oh, they're going to get him on the security checks and that's how it's going to go." And like kind of yeah, we ended up there, but
Mm-hmm.
I really was not expecting that the bodies weren't dissolved. They were perfectly preserved.
Yeah, they were
Wow.
even the book used the term pickled, like as how like
I mean, it makes
which
sense. Pickling
it
is a method of preserving a food
preserving.
for a
Yeah.
very long time. I mean, pickling something makes it last a very long time. I don't know if anybody is on cooking TikTok or Instagram or whatever. I've seen that lady who has a traditional Chinese pickling recipe where her pickle jar is like her pickle brine is like 16 years old
Oh my God.
because it's like a perpetual ferment. Like it's
Yeah.
just it's that good at preserving.
Yeah, like you would think that after so many people, like I'm sure people in the community were catching on to what he was doing, but
Mhm.
it's not someone you could go up against, like because he had his hand in everyone's bucket. You know what I'm saying? Like it seems like because Trevor and Barry were close, they had a relationship, and out of nowhere, John had control on him to the
Mhm.
point that he helped kill Barry.
That's crazy. It's so crazy.
But yeah, so that's why I wanted to put that into two parts, because otherwise this would be like an hour long of just
Yeah, of
death.
just death and destruction and horribleness. Wow.
But yeah,
That was intense. I'm glad we got through it.
yeah, I thought it was an interesting like story whenever I read it. I put
Mhm.
the link for it or the title of it in the first show notes. I could put it in the second show notes for you guys too.
Yeah, I think it was
Um,
pretty interesting and didn't wasn't this one suggested?
it was
Okay.
suggested
Yeah.
by I think she's from Australia as well. She's
Nice.
suggested it in the Discord.
Nice. I have like one or two, I think, Australian cases that I was looking into too that were suggested. Actually, I was talking about one of them at work not long ago.
Yeah, you think you mentioned it, the dingo case.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a famous one. It's not like I'm going to be talking about a case that no one's heard of. Like so many people have heard of it, but I do think it's genuinely a very interesting case and probably Australia's most famous, I'd say most globally famous crime.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm interested to hear more about that one because
Mhm.
I think she put it in the Discord too. I think is
Yep.
where I like saw you guys talking about it.
Yep. Yep. I did see it in the Discord.
So yeah, you guys should join the Discord. We are always checking it to see what you guys have to say.
Mhm.
Always looking for recommendations of what you like to hear, what you want to hear. You can go to the link on any of our biographies. It's a link tree. Just click it. There's a link that says "Come join a Little Wicked's Discord," and then you make a Discord account, and there we are. Easy peasy.
Yep.
Um, you can also find us on any social media, um, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. We are all there. We're on
Mhm.
YouTube. You can find us at a Little Wicked Pod.
Yep.
Um, and find us on our Patreon. We have bonus episode once a month,
Mhm.
$4 a month. It's a fun little community. There's only a handful of us, but it's fine.
The Patreon's a lot of fun. It is. It's really
Yeah.
inexpensive for for what you get. It's a lot of fun. You get to vote on the episodes. Except last time where y'all voted too late after I had already had my episode written. So last week's Patreon episode was pure chaos, but it was very enjoyable chaos. I had a great time. I hope you guys had just as good a
Yeah.
time as me.
Yeah. I posted it today, a couple days late, but I didn't have time to fully edit it and everything. And for some
Yeah.
reason, like after we got through the whole
Hmm.
topic, your audio cut out. So I had to like,
Amazing.
yeah, I had to like chop it and I put a little blurb in there saying, "Sorry, I'm ending it here. Thank you. Come again."
We're having a great time, guys. Technical difficulties abound.
I think it's Audacity. Like it just decides when it wants to stop working.
Right. Right. I'm still thinking about the way that Riverside classifies our stuff with discussion of roadkill.
Discussion. Yeah. I cracked up for like a solid 10 minutes on
It
that.
was amazing. We need a blooper reel. Honestly, I wish that was the thing that we like kept because we should do a blooper reel and we should put it on Patreon. That's another reason you guys should subscribe to the Patreon. If we get enough of you guys, we'll do a blooper reel. We have
Yeah.
plenty.
But yeah, so thank you guys for listening. We appreciate every single one of you. If you guys want to send in anything, you can also send an email to a littlewickedpodcast@gmail.com. But other than that, I think I have nothing else to add for today.
Yeah, I definitely don't have anything. That one was really interesting. I am glad it was a two-parter. I think it's really fun when we do the two-part episodes, but also that one was was intense. There's a lot to that, but it was really interesting. And I love whenever we get to the suggested ones from our listeners.
Yeah. So I just think that was pretty wicked.
Yeah, that one was really wicked. File, save.